are things unsaid, I think, that we left from other episodes. And this is one of the things that we do, is to kind of revisit again some points that we might wanted to expand on or to revisit. One of them is the buyer beware, because I think it's a very important thing for the seeker to know these things. And of course, people have different objectives, they have different personalities, and they have different wants. I remember that I wanted the most traditional, the most close to the beginning of things. I wanted to know, I was very curious about these things. So for me, it was very important to be absolutely accurate on what the information was and how I got it and from where. And of course, if I'm going to buy something somewhere, I really want to make my research, not only because of it's cheap or whatever, but it's because of the quality of things. I want to make the best balance between quality and, of course, affordability. And I think that we're all like a little bit like this.
Some more than others, right? Some make informed decisions, some don't. Since some people are really impetuous and they can't wait and they're impatient, and I can certainly understand that as well. And then jump into something. And then have regrets. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about too, with this whole idea of buyer beware.
Yes, because I think that the Veiled Priestess said that when she mentioned, imagine that I just go on and on and on for years in this place and then discover that what I have been involved in has no resemblance whatsoever of what was the Alexandrian tradition or what was done by Alexandrian. It's a very important point, because there is an attempt by some initiates to take things apart, not really to try to understand, but to really actually fit their own understanding of things and piece them again together in something that it's really unrecognizable. For the most of us, really.
And then disguise that as evolution, as growth. And in reality, it's just muddying the practice for really no magical benefit.
Right. And it's really something that I feel very strongly about. I know that we're going to talk about this in another episode when we talk about tradition and what tradition is and the basics, which I think that, of course, we're going to talk about this. Coven autonomy. We talked about this, I think, in episode 2, where we talk about what is autonomy and how it really works, but we really didn't expand a lot on it. And seekers don't really know what that means. If you talk about, everybody is autonomous and every coven for itself, which is technically, it is true, but not obliterating everything that was taught by Alex and Maxine, or was done by them or created by them, and give it to us as a tradition. And all you are left with is your lineage, which is really not sufficient, right? So when I say buyer beware, it's to really understand that not everyone that says that are Alexandrian have that integrity of preserving some of the things that were done and that make us what we are. Because, there are two traditions, very distinct ones. One is Gardnerian, one is Alexandrian. There are differences between them. And because there are differences, and if you can compare the two, then there is a definition of that tradition. There is some things that we say, well, that's not Gardnerian or that's not Alexandrian, because we identify that and we know what it is. So, of course, we can't talk about the whole tradition or for the whole tradition, but we can talk about the tradition because we know it. We are in it. So there's this thing about, you can't talk for the tradition because it's a thing that it's impossible to do. Well, while that is true, because everybody is independent, nobody is an authority that will regulate the whole tradition, but all of us can talk about the tradition. What really is difficult to see here, I think, it's because there's a proclamation that we are independent, therefore we can do whatever we want. Nobody can interfere with that, which is, of course, true. but not to the loss of the identity of what it is or was done by Alex and Maxine. That, to me, is not really Alexandrian.
I absolutely agree. Coven autonomy, I think, is in some ways misconstrued. I think Coven autonomy, for me, means we do not have a pope. We do not have a bishop that oversees everyone's practice and makes sure that you're doing things absolutely as written, which you cannot deviate from. So that is Coven autonomy, that we don't have to speak to someone and give them, that complete power and control over what we do. With that being said, and a lot of people will refer to the Book of Shadows as a recipe, right, as a recipe book. But even then, are you to just cut out all the things that you just don't like that the Book of Shadows says? And then your Coven autonomy allows you to do such a thing. And then, as you say, how far then does that deviate from practice? And again, we're doing this too really for like buyer beware in terms of seekers, and that seekers really need now to investigate Alexandrian covens and Alexandrian leadership and really understand what they are practicing and whether that coincides with what they want.
I think the pillar in Coven autonomy is responsibility.
Yeah.
So when people say, I'm autonomous, it means that you are responsible for a list of things that you have to run in order to be independent. And independence and being autonomous doesn't mean being an anarchist. So we have the responsibility of following the tradition and honoring the tradition that they are in. So that this is what I feel that it's autonomy. I feel that people are just discarding that. So I think that's the word, responsibility. If you were coming now to the tradition, what would you look for in this particular tradition? How would you research before you commit?
Well, and again, this is, in retrospect, because I certainly made mistakes. I think I was impatient and didn't necessarily do my due diligence. And there was also this blanket of coven secrecy. We really didn't know what was going on. And, I really can't tell you, right, the ins and outs of our practice. And absolutely, that is true to a certain degree. But I didn't know what questions to ask. And now this is now years ago. And times have changed, especially in terms of technology, availability of materials. There's so many now more books that have been published on the traditions, how to seek covens, what questions to ask, what red flags, right, to look for, podcasts, including ours, right, that have developed. So that is what I would do differently if that was available to me completely, is to see, read, and listen to as much as I possibly could, and then speak to as many groups as I possibly could, armed with the information that I gathered and armed with questions about, well, what does your practice look like? I've read this. Do you do this? Or do you do that? And there are elders that are very available as well to answer these types of questions. And again, like you, I am a traditionalist, and I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's a bad word, that wanting to go back to its origins. That's not, of course I live in the 21st century. Of course there's evolution and there's developments and things change. However, what's so wrong of wanting to go back to a practice that Alex and Maxine did? Because it worked. So that's how I would go about it. And then look for a group that was aligned with what I was actually seeking. So if you are attracted to a DIY, do-it-yourself Alexandrian coven that breaks all the rules because you think it's cool, good luck. Because you think it's cool and it's so 2024, then that's your call. Just make that decision with eyes wide open.
I agree completely with what you said. I would go about it the same way. When I was looking for Alexandrian covens, I contacted Janet Farrer, which was at the reference. So, of course, I wanted to be on that particular reference of people that really were good references or people that were there at the time. So I had almost like that kind of leaning towards what was done. And I was very inquisitive as well. So I always asked questions about, why do you do that? Was that done by Alex at the time? What did he do? And then there's answers to this. Oh, we don't do that because, we know that Alex did, but we don't really do that because that. So take that and think about it, right? We're not saying that we all do exactly what Alex did, because we have individual practices. And of course, we're in different countries, we're in different times, we're in different things, of course, adapt and change a little bit. That's another thing that I would ask. What is your knowledge of the Alexandrian tradition? What can you tell me about it? Ask intelligent questions. Go in and just say, I've heard that Alex blah, 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 or Maxine did this and this and this. What are your views on this? Not necessarily do you do this, but what are your views on this? And then listen what they have to say. If they know what they're doing, they will give you an intelligent answer, and probably one that will satisfy you. If not, if they're going to divert from that what you asked and answer something that they thought that was a better answer rather than your question directly, then I would think twice about that. But these are the little things that you have to look for, because there is a whole lot of people that will do this. This is a very personal path. So it is your path, and you need to guard and safeguard that, I think. Right.
Yeah, and I agree. If they divert, right, they divert the question or they divert the answer, or cloak it under, well, that's secret. You're probably right. You're probably actually, as a seeker, not asking so many questions that are oath bound. So yeah, if they're being cagey, absolutely, that's a red flag. Also, if they give you the, well, I've been practicing this for 30 years answer, that to me can be also a red flag in some regards, because now you still have to do your due diligence of whether or not this person is adequately trained. Have they been doing 30 years of really good work? Or have they been doing 30 years of really limited work where they
committed work
or intermittent work?
I mean, this is something that you wouldn't do maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You wouldn't do this. The approach to this process would be different, because things were fresher, a little bit less degraded in terms of lost in translation, lost in time, lost in, procedure, lost in accuracy, there are people who are unaware of certain things, for instance, that for us, it's obvious because we studied the tradition, we studied the history of it, we talked with the elders, we talked with people. So for me, you need to ask the questions, you need to be interested in, you need to have read everything that you need about the tradition. And there's a lot of things that we can read about that.
I know in the past, right, I would assume, right, in like the 70s or 80s, especially the United States, I think you would just be happy to find another person that practices the craft. I don't care what kind of form it takes. I'll do it, right? I'll join that coven, just because it was so difficult to connect. And that's not the case today.
No, it isn't.
No,
it isn't. Unfortunately, it isn't. So buyer beware. It would be the take on this particular mini episode of Things Unsaid. Do you have anything else that you wanna mention?
Oh, we're probably going to have to do a Things Unsaid that were unsaid that should be said show where tonight I'll be in bed and I'll be like, oh, I should have said that. Not unsaid. We're on unsaid episode.
Well, but it's a little bit of a note that we left for seekers. I think it's important.
I agree.